Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church devotional. We're now making our way again through Genesis. We had a break for quite some time, and now that we're also under COVID-19 lockdown and we have some time, we can be getting back to our recordings. We're in Genesis chapter 42. We've gone through 41 chapters of Genesis, and so you might have to get yourself caught up with the last few chapters, knowing that we are talking about the life of Joseph, who was he was basically sold as a slave by his brothers, went to Egypt, but he is, in God's providence, been raised up out of prison because he interpreted some dreams from Pharaoh. And he is actually the guy in charge of Egypt as they're collecting lots of grain, lots of food during 7 years of an unbelievable harvest that is about ready to really save the world because there's going to be a famine that's coming. And we saw that Joseph also then was given a wife by Pharaoh, and he had 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim, that came out. And that now takes us to chapter 42, where a famine is now beginning. So the 7 years of plenty all are now ended, and there's 7 years of grain harvest that Joseph was able to manage, and he gained Pharaoh's favor in doing this. But now the scene switches and goes to his family, his brothers and his father, in the land of Israel. The land of Canaan, I guess. There's no land of Israel yet, but land of Canaan. Now, we're chapter 42. Let's just follow along as we go. So, chapter 42. Now, Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" Don't you like that? In the first verse, a father looking at his sons. What are you guys looking at? What are you staring at each other for? He says, "Behold, I've heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us in that place so that we may live and not die." Jacob is really old. The brothers are quite old. They've got grown kids. And this is how the father speaks to them. "What are you people looking at? You have no idea what's going on. Here we are starving, and I know there's grain in Egypt. So go down there so we may live and not die." So verse 3, "Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, 'I'm afraid that harm may befall him.'" So there's no way I'm sending Benjamin. I'm already still having grief with Joseph, knowing that he was killed by an animal, so he thinks that's what his sons told him. And so he's really stricken, so he says, "I'm going to send 10, but not Benjamin, because Benjamin and Joseph are from the wife that he really loves, Rachel." Verse 5, "So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also." It says the famine hit God's people. It hit Israel. It hit Jacob and all his family. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land, and he was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Now that should strike something in your memory. Remember, Joseph had dreams where he dreamed about some stalks of wheat, that his stalk of wheat was there and all the others bowed down to him. And there was another dream about the sun and moon and the stars and 11 stars that were all bowing down to him. And he told his brothers and told his parents, and they got really irritated at that. Well, now Joseph's brothers come and they bow down to him with their faces in the ground. And when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." But Joseph has recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. Verse 9, here's something very telling right here. "Joseph remembered the dreams which he had about them, and said to them, 'You are spies. You've come to look at the undefended parts of our land.'" Now, if he remembered the dreams, why did he say that? Why didn't he just come out and say, "Hey, I'm Joseph. Remember the dream? You guys are bowing. That's exactly what happened." And he could have maybe gained their favor in that way. But he didn't do that. He remembered the dreams in verse 9, and then he immediately goes and gives really a false accusation. "You're spies. You've come to look at the independent parts of our land." Why is that? Well, one of the things that Joseph understood is that in his dreams he had 11 stalks of wheat that were bowing down to him. And he had 11 of his brothers. 11 stars were bowing down to him, and his parents. So this is not a fulfillment of the dream. There's only 10 here. He needs 11, and he needs his father for sure. And so that's got to happen. So he's saying, oh, okay, we're close. I see what's happening here. I remember the dreams, but we don't have everybody here yet. So he immediately goes into a way to accuse them because he knows they are massively guilty, essentially of murder, trying to murder him. And so they said to him, no, my lord, but your servants have gone to buy food. They don't know what's going on. They said, what are you talking about? We're not spies. We've gone to buy food. We're all sons of one man. We're honest men. Your servants are not spies. Yet he said to them, no, but you've come to look at the undefended parts of our land. But they said, your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive. Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you, you are spies. Here he is, he's pressing upon them. And he's pressing upon them to say who they really are. This is not really a good group of brothers that Joseph has. He's got 11 other brothers. Now Benjamin's younger than he is, the only one that's younger. But of these 10 brothers, this is just a bunch of hooligans. I mean, you've got Reuben, the firstborn. He committed incest by going to one of his father's concubines, one of the mothers, and he tried to then get with her, which would put him over Jacob, his father. So he was really kind of trying to take over the family through having incest. And then you've got Simeon and Levi, two bloodthirsty just butchers who got so upset because their sister got raped, that they went in and they killed everybody in the town of Shechem. You've got Judah, who really went and got with a prostitute, and then he found out it was his daughter-in-law, but before he found out it was his daughter-in-law, that he wanted to burn her alive. I mean, these are people who are just ruthless and cruel and just having no discipline whatsoever and massively dealing with self-centeredness and sin. This is his brothers. What is Joseph doing here? Is he really going to put one on them? He's going to make them pay? No. This is not what Joseph is doing. Joseph here is now, we're going to see in verse 15, he's testing them. He needs to lead them to what they need most, and we're going to see that. And there's a very amazing New Testament application right here of this tragic story, but actually it's not a tragic story, it's a story of actually God and His grace of what we really need. Your servants are 12 brothers in all, sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no longer alive. So Joseph said to them, it is as I said to you, you are spies. And notice verse 15, by this you will be tested. Maybe make that our first point out of this. He is testing them. Testing them. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. I want you to go get your youngest brother and bring him here if you are truthful. You will do that. He knew that there's no way his father would let Benjamin come. He knew that there's no way that the brothers want to go tell their father that they're stuck there and they need to get Benjamin. But how bad do you really want this? Are you still thinking about yourselves? Self-preservation? Is that all you worry about? By this you'll be tested. Joseph is testing them to see if they can come to grips with their own sin. Send one of you that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. But if not, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. I don't think any one of those people wanted to go back to their father and tell them that this thing all went sideways and they're going to have to now release Benjamin. No one wanted to be the person to tell Jacob that. They would all rather stay there in Egypt. You'll see. Send one of you. So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. So Joseph puts them in prison right there. He's testing them to say, do you really acknowledge who you are? Do you acknowledge your guilt and your sin? Now Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, Do this and live, for I fear God. That had to immediately throw them. Here they are, we've gone now basically about 16 verses, 18 verses, 18 verses. And they've never mentioned God at all. They're supposedly the people of God. They're the people who have the promise. They've never mentioned anything about God at all. But yet here's this Egyptian who's all dressed up in fine linen, and looking really sharp, and he says, I fear God. For I fear God. That had really immediately, whoa, that shook them. So he's testing them to see if they understand their guilt, and in part of that testing is he puts the name of God right out there in front of them. If you are honest men, see, if you're honest men, you'll say what you did. If you're honest men, you will acknowledge that. If you're not honest men, you will have completely forgotten about what you did with me, and you'll be thinking about yourselves. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers be confined in your prison, but as for the rest of you, go carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified, and you will not die. And they did so. Maybe he knew that they didn't want to go back to their father, so he said, I'll tell you what, all of you are going to go back to your father, and I'll keep one. The exact opposite of what they were thinking. So now he's got them in prison, he's got them thinking, he's confronted them, putting them in a very tough situation. Will they be thinking about self-preservation, or will they be thinking about their own guilt? He is testing them to force them to be confronted with their guilt. Then they said to one another, truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of our soul when he pleaded with us. Yet he would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. There it is, right there. Guilt. They acknowledged it, which is a confession. Truly we are guilty concerning our brother. They immediately come out with it while they're talking in jail. Because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen, therefore this distress has come upon us. Now Reuben, verse 22, answered them, saying, did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Now comes the reckoning for his blood. So Reuben said, yeah, now comes the reckoning for his blood. I didn't want to do this. This is something interesting that Joseph found this out. Verse 23, they did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. So Joseph's pretty clever. He's got an interpreter between them, but he understands everything they're saying because he is their brother. He turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. So he says, fine, I'm taking Simeon. He goes in jail here. You guys can go on, but he's turning so they can't see him crying. And he's crying because he understands now that they've been led to understand their guilt, and they confessed. They confessed to each other, sure, which means it's on their heart still. It says their hearts are still soft because they understand their guilt. Joseph has led them through Joseph's grace, led them to understand their own guilt, which allows their heart to be soft. And that's what he was doing. He was testing them to see, are you guys so hardened you're beyond repair? Or, hey, there's something here, and you're my brothers, and you've acknowledged your guilt. But he wouldn't let them know. So verse 25, and Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and to store every man's money in a sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there. As one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money, and behold, it was in the mouth of his sack. Then he said to his brothers, my money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack. And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, what is this that God has done to us? You see, acknowledgement of guilt, what this has done, is led to godly fear. What is this that God has done to us? They immediately understand they've sinned against God. They know that this was not just against Joseph. They're not saying Joseph is doing this to us. They immediately went to, God's doing this to us. So Joseph had given orders to fill their bags with grain. In other words, give everything back, put it in their sacks, don't ask any questions, don't say anything about it, and just let them go on their journey, which they did. And just one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey, and all of a sudden here's the money in his sack. They're like, oh no! What happened? Why did you take your money back? But they immediately looked and said, what is this that God has done to us? So, true guilt, understanding your own guilt, that you really are guilty of something, truly leads to a godly fear, which is, oh, I'm really guilty against God, not just against Joseph or some other person. I'm now concerned with my guilt before God. What happens after that? Verse 29, when they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, spoke harshly with us, and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, we are honest men, we're not spies. Can you imagine? We're honest men, right? I'm sure that's what everybody says going to Egypt. We're honest, we are not dishonest people. That's what they told him. We're 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no longer alive, and the youngest is with our father today in the land of Canaan. The man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, that I may know that you're not spies, but honest men. I'll give your brother to you, that you may trade in the land. So we're just not going to go anywhere until I get that brother. I want to understand that full brother. Now it came about as they were emptying their sacks. Now this is in the conversation as they're having there. He says, as they were emptying their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were dismayed. So while they're telling the father this story about what happened to them, they start untying their sacks, and all the money was in all the sacks. Now they're really having a problem. Their father Jacob said to them, you've bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. Remember, Simeon is back in jail with Joseph. Not only do I not have Joseph, now I don't have Simeon, and now you take Benjamin. All these things are against me. So poor Jacob, you know, he's had to deal with some of these things, but then remember who Jacob was, the heel grabber, the deceiver. He himself is known for his own cunning. And now here it's coming back. And he's saying, all this is against me. I don't have Simeon, I don't have Joseph. And now you want me to get rid of Benjamin? In verse 37 and 38, now bring us to what fear takes us to. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, you may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I'll return him to you. I mean, Reuben says something that's pretty silly. He says, you can kill my 2 sons. But they didn't have anything to do with this. His 2 sons. But it just shows you where Reuben's willing to go, how far he's willing to go to make this right. You may put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I'll return him to you. I'm going to put my life on the line. I know he put his son's life on the line, but he says, I'm going to put my life and go back to Egypt to do this. But Jacob said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother's dead, and he alone is left. If harm should befall him on the journey you are taking, then you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. You're going to bring everything down to sorrow. Reuben's reaction here to say, we need to make this right, you can even put my sons to death, is showing that there is a godly sorrow. Everything about this is they are greatly grieved in what they've done. They start off with guilt, and then they go to godly fear because they realize their sin is against God. And then they go to sorrow, like how could this happen? I am so sorrowful. Jacob is now really bearing this in terms of sorrow. And that's what's happening here. Joseph is bringing his family, which includes Jacob, his father. He's bringing them all through testing to understand the process of their being confronted with their own guilt, which leads to then a healthy fear of God, like my guilt is against God, and then a great sorrow for what that is and what that has been against God. And there's a great sorrow now, not wanting to preserve yourself, not wanting to get yourself out of a situation, not wanting to hide the facts of this, but sorrow. Sorrow. If harm should befall him on the journey you're taking, then you'll bring my gray hair down to Sheol and sorrow. And Reuben is willing to do that. So Joseph is demonstrating a wonderful grace. He's leading them into grace so that they can see this is how you can get your hearts right. Remember, these are hooligans. People who commit incest, murder. They want to, getting with prostitutes and wanting to kill them. These are tough people. They're never going to be perfect. And they don't immediately become perfect. But to get out of their situation, they come to understand their guilt, their fear, and their sorrow. Paul says the same thing in 2 Corinthians chapter 7. And just even add one more verse, Romans chapter 2 verse 4 says, don't you even know that the kindness of God leads you to repentance? It's actually God's kindness that takes you down the path of repentance. Well, Paul says to the Corinthian church in 2 Corinthians 7 verse 10, for the sorrow that is according to the will of God produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. But the sorrow of the world produces death. If they would have been sorrowful just to save their own necks, just to preserve their own selves, and leave somebody in prison to be able to just go off on your own and make another lie, like they did with Joseph, that would be worldly sorrow. Just saying, let's get out of this situation. But a godly sorrow is according to the will of God, produces a repentance without regret. That's Reuben. You can kill my two sons. That's repentance without regret. We are willing to make this right, Dad. And I'm going to sacrifice my family. Because I understand we've sinned against God and we are guilty. Now they understood this, but they have never told Joseph this yet. But they've at least acknowledged it amongst themselves. This is Joseph giving a great grace to his brothers, which is really what the grace of God is, in how we have sinned against the holy God of our lives with sin that we will not let go of. And God in his kindness leads us, sometimes by testing us and by revealing our guilt to ourselves so that we can have a healthy fear of God, leading to sorrow. And that's what takes us then to understand forgiveness. Ultimately, forgiveness. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's Genesis chapter 42 here. Kind of a long section, but kind of a great section showing what Joseph has done to help us. And I hope you'll stay with us on this, getting caught up. Genesis 1 to 41. Now we did 42, and then we'll see you next on Genesis 43.